All right, today we're jumping into Shoe Dog, the memoir by Nike founder Phil Knight. Now, look, if you're expecting a story about a flawless corporate giant that had it all figured out from day one, you are in for a serious surprise. This is a story that honestly should never have worked. Okay, let's just get right into it because this slide says it all. Over on the left, you've got the myth, right? The success story we all picture, a genius plan, a ton of cash, and a straight line to the top. But on the right, that's the reality Phil Knight was living. This book doesn't just poke holes in the myth, it completely blows it apart. We're talking about a story built on nonstop uncertainty, crippling debt, and basically teetering on the edge of bankruptcy for years.
So where did this global empire even begin? Well, it wasn't in some fancy high-rise boardroom. Nope. It all started with an idea that most people would have just called crazy.
And that was it. Seriously, this was the entire master plan. While he was still a student, Phil Knight had this simple hunch that high-quality, lower-cost running shoes from Japan could actually take on the big German brands that dominated America. There were no complex spreadsheets, no massive focus groups, just an idea. So what did he do first? Well, the first steps were about as scracky as you can possibly get. He flies to Japan, somehow manages to talk his way into a distribution deal, and then comes back home to sell the very first shoes right out of the trunk of his car. But what's really important here is step 3. Improvise everything else. That wasn't just how they started. It pretty much became their company motto for the next decade.
Let's see how this all unfolds because that improvisation led directly to one of the main themes of the book, this constant, brutal battle for survival, all fueled by some seriously chaotic growth.
See, the company, which was called Blue Ribbon Sports back then, was growing like crazy. The problem was they were almost too successful. Every single dollar they earned had to be poured right back into ordering more shoes from Japan, so they were perpetually completely broke. The banks hated their business model. They were always threatening to pull their loans, which would have just ended the company right then and there. So from the outside, they looked like this rising star, but internally, they were literally one late payment away from total collapse. And this quote just nails the lesson from that time. Knight knew how dangerous it was. He knew they were flying way too close to the sun. But he also knew that with the kind of ambition they had, playing it safe was never going to work. That risk, that was the price of admission just to have a shot at winning.
Now, of course, Knight wasn't doing this all by himself, but the team he built around him, it was anything but your typical polished corporate dream team. They were, as he called them, a bunch of misfits.
Just look at this contrast. On the left, you've got what every company thinks they need. People with perfect resumes who follow all the rules. But the early Nike team, man, they were a collection of passionate, sometimes really stubborn, and totally unconventional people who were just fiercely loyal to the idea. They weren't there for a 9-to-5 job. They were there because they truly believed.
And here's the lesson from all that, and it's so powerful for anyone trying to build anything. Knight didn't hire people who looked good on paper. He surrounded himself with people who shared his fire, his passion. It was that shared belief, that character, that somehow dragged them through all those impossible moments.
And that belief system didn't just build the company. In a way, it became the company. This is the moment where Nike stops being just a shoe distributor and starts its journey to becoming a global icon.
They had this realization that they weren't just selling rubber and shoelaces. They were selling an idea. The brand started to soak up the story of its own creation, a story about ambition, about struggle, about the spirit of pushing past what you think is possible. Nike became a symbol for that journey.
And this, right here, is the golden ticket. People weren't just buying shoes to go for a run. They were buying into an identity. They were buying a piece of that story. The emotion tied to the brand became way more powerful than just the function of the shoe itself. So, after all those years of struggle, what are the big takeaways? What do you really learn from living on the brink of failure for that long?
The book really wrestles with this question because for years, Phil Knight was just consumed by this constant nagging fear of failure, of going bankrupt, of letting his whole team down. So in a situation like that, what does courage even look like? And here's the answer, and it's so important. Courage was not about being fearless. Knight was scared out of his mind all the time. Courage was the act of getting up every single morning and taking the next step in spite of that fear. It's about deciding to keep going when every part of you wants to just quit. So let's just boil down the biggest lessons from this whole wild ride. First, start before you're ready. Don't wait. Second, accept that chaos is just part of growth. It's not a sign you're failing.
Third, build an identity, something people can connect with, not just a product. Fourth, you have to embrace risk. It's just part of the deal. And finally, maybe the biggest lesson of all, victory isn't some magic moment. It's the simple result of sticking with it day after day for the long haul. And we'll end on this final thought from the book. The story of Nike really shows us that winning isn't clean or easy. It's messy, it's confusing, and a lot of the time, it's downright terrifying. But it's in those moments, those periods of the greatest uncertainty, that the most incredible victories are actually born.